So, Venture Brothers, Radiant is the Blood of the Baboon Heart, is the movie finale to Venture Brothers, which, like, we needed this. After the Venture Brothers, probably one of the best Adult Swim shows ever made, was unceremoniously canceled after 7 seasons, it needed a proper ending. Especially with, like, how season 7 ended on, like, such a big cliffhanger that you wanted to see what happens next. We needed closure, and sure enough, we got it with this film, and it's mostly like it's surprising, like, how well that like the creators of Jackson Public and Doc Hammer can just jump right into this material after so many years and still make it work. And it's like it's one of those shows, like, it's worth the wait. Like, we only got like 7 seasons, but that's like 7 seasons over the course of, like, oh my god, like, what, like, it started in like 2004, 2003 if you want to count the pilot, and it didn't end till like, what, like 2018. So we've been used to, like, massive gaps in years and, like, waiting to see, what will happen with Venture Brothers next. And it's always been worth it because, like, the animation has always turned out brilliantly. The scripts are, that they're hilarious and layered, and they tap into so much unique and satirical aspects of pop culture that it's always worth the wait. So yeah, Radiant is the Blood of the Baboon Heart is pretty much like it plays like season 8. Like, it doesn't try to. Like, I'll say this: if you're not familiar with Venture Brothers, you gotta watch the show for 2 reasons. One is because it's awesome, and 2 is because this movie will not slow down to explain any of it. It picks up immediately where season 7 left off, with Hank Venture leaving home and the Monarch and Doc Venture realizing that they share the same DNA. How is Monarch gonna feel about being the arch nemesis of what seems like his brother? So a lot of questions to be answered here, and the film does answer these questions, but it answers them the way that, the way that Venture Brothers always makes that material work, which is that you will get answers, but they won't be the answers you expect. And yeah, because, like, when you do get the answers, like, they're much more ridiculous, and they're not what you would have predicted. This is a film that stays true to the formula by having, like, the Monarch realizing that he has a new suit with, like, a grappling gun that comes out of his belly button, and thinks it's so cool, only to have, like, him use it in, like, the situation where it would come in handy, and it doesn't work. It just malfunctions, and it blows up in their face, and it's hilarious. You also have, like, a new organization called Arch, which has come in, and they've kind of, like, they're a new secretive competitive organization that the Guild and OSI have no idea what they are. So a lot of mystery going on here. There's some framing going on. There's some dark history unearthed. And it plays out in the fashion that you would expect from Venture Brothers. So a lot of the aspects that you love about the show are still here. The animation still looks beautiful. It still looks crisp. It doesn't feel like they toned it down for the budget here. It has major theatrics, considering that the big set piece here is that Venture Tower gets lifted into the air by robots. So that's a pretty cool sight to see, especially with how it's done, and how another one of Doc's inventions just kind of blows up in his face, as they always do. The voice acting hasn't missed a beat here. Like, it doesn't feel like, I mean, it's only been like a few years since, like, we got the last season of the TV show, so not much has changed. Like, I was a little bit worried about that with Doc Hammer, just because, like, Adult Swim did this little bit where they posed season 8 in the form of, like, a puppet show for just, like, a quick little segment, and, like, I could kind of hear, like, Doc's voice straining a bit there. And to point it out where it's present in the film, like, he does kind of strain his voice a little bit with Shore Leave. It feels like he's trying to hit a little bit higher with Shore Leave, and it's still a little bit gravelly. But for the most part, everyone else's voices are still on point here. Like, James Urbaniak still brings it as Dr. Venture. He's still got the same tone and voice. Patrick Warburton is back as Brock and just does his Brock voice as you've always known it. Everyone else's voice are still on point here. Like, Especially the voices that they bring back here, like Clancy Brown is back as Red Death, and he's still a lot of fun with like that deep voice. Who's like, this guy who separates his work from his family, so it's great to see that dynamic and how like he lets his daughter name like his horse that he rides into battle. You have J.K. Simmons returning as Ben, who you might remember briefly showed up as like as kind of like the scientist who lives, off to the side on the venture compound. So he's there to more or less just like divulge the secrets. Like, oh, you really want to know this? I know everything. I can, I'll tell you over a few beers. And then, special shout outs to like, Stephen Rattazzi, I believe, as Dr. Orpheus. Dr. Orpheus is always such fun. And the fact that there's a great sequence here where, he basically ends up in like the costume of like Zardos at one point, which is just like too wonderful for words. And I like how they incorporate. It's not just like him in random Zardos cosplay. Like there's a reason for him to be in it for that particular sequence in the film. There isn't like it feels just like a condensed version of season 8. More than it does like like some big epic Venture Brothers movie, and I think that actually works in this film. Some people might find that like a hindrance, that it wasn't like a much grander film in which like like the OSI was like threatened and like the guild is collapsing and Dr. Venture has to save today or something epic like that, because that was my biggest worry for the film. Because like the other Adult Swim movie we got last year was Yaguadin Hunger Force film Plantasm, and that was trying to be like like that epic showdown of like, here's the final battle that that you've all been waiting to see, and it didn't work for that style of the show, and it felt like a much different movie. And Radiant is the Blood of the Baboon Heart, which title I love to say. It still feels like Venture Brothers. It's still trying to bring like this story to its conclusion, but still brings out all the hallmarks that you love with it, and still weaves it all together so well. Like, I love the fact that they're still keeping track of all like the different characters here and weave them in brilliantly. Like, Colonel Gentleman is still in a relationship with Billy Quizboy's mother, and I love like they briefly bring that up. I love that they make better use of some of the other characters who don't feel like they don't do as much. Like, I love that Jefferson Twilight, voiced by Charles Purnell, actually does get to fight Blackulas in this one. And then just general ridiculousness, like the fact that like Jefferson Twilight has a car called the Blood Vessel, and how Dr. Orpheus has basically kind of like this Doctor Strange brownstone where they have like a golem made out of pants. Just all this fun stuff that you can evoke with like all the geeky pop culture, and try to weave it into something that is like perfectly satirical, where it never feels like it has to slow down and point out like, oh, here's this reference, here's this one. There are a few times when the characters are like, oh wait, what's this from? And then they have to kind of like remind themselves. Like at one point they reference 16 Candles, and a character feels like they have to point it out. Even with the bit with like Zardos, it feels like Dr. Orpheus has to point it out. Although I think it's Jefferson Twilight who has to point it out, just because he's more excited about it, pointing out obscure cinema, which is what you expect from Venture Brothers. So yeah, like there's a lot more excitement, I guess, in this one. There's more like action. There's a ridiculous, but in like the ridiculous fashion you expect from Venture Brothers. Like there's a ridiculous sequence where like, was it like Doc, Hatred, Monarch, Helper, and 21 all have to stop these robots from lifting a building, and they screw up in like the most brilliant way, where they're like flung all around a room and like their eyeballs bleed and their clothing gets ripped off, and it's just it's that perfect level of like slapstick that I've come to expect from Venture Brothers, while also giving a decent amount of closure. Like, even when I don't want to give it away, but just like the way that they give you the final answers is the way that I would expect the Venture Brothers to go down, where it's not that important who is the mother of Hank and Dean. Like they lead you on the mystery and the trail, but obviously the journey is more exciting than the answer, because especially when you get to the end, you actually find out the answer is way more effed up than what the actual mystery was leading them towards here, is just brilliant subversion, especially the displays of like by the end of in the third act, like there's some grotesque violence and nudity that just kind of like catches you off guard here, which I would have it no other way. So there's there's not much to say. Like unless you're like a Venture Brothers fan, like it's hard to communicate to a non-fan just like what makes it work so well. I guess like the smaller moments of like character development here, like I love like how at one point Monarch is trying to raid Venture's building again. But while he's doing so, he's bickering with Henchman 21 over like I think they're bickering over like which songs were played by Toto, while they're in the middle of like staging like their their weapons to fire, which is just that's what you expect. And just like the banter they have, the way that the characters bring just the right amount of personality to each scene, especially with like the new addition of Mantilla, the runner of Arch, who's played by Nina Arianda. And like the way that she like appears, it seems like she's gonna like take down like OSI and like the guild and like wants to like dominate the world. And then when you actually figure out what she's really trying to do, you find out that it's a little bit more petty than you thought before. So yeah, just brilliant like satire on like the whole hero villain dynamic and aspects of like film and comic books. Just beautiful. Just like it's the Venture Brothers movie I always wanted. And like it doesn't quite, I don't quite want to say like it shuts the door on Venture Brothers and locks it behind it, but it does like sweep it up enough where you're not feeling the same way you did at the end of season 7, where you just kind of feel let down that you didn't get to see the story culminate. And here you do. You actually, this like, hey, if Venture Brothers has to end here, it's a great way to end this series. I dare say, like, yeah, it's a perfect way to end the Venture Brothers saga, which is like easily one of the best Adult Swim shows ever made. Like I've watched it since college. I've loved every bit of it, and this is just the most beautiful way to end the series on highlighting everything that it does so well and just cranking it up to its levels of where it works so perfectly.